Hi everyone, how are you? Tell us, where are you joining us from? Hello. Yeah, also tell us which round are you applying? Mm, great. Uh, more people is joining now. Mm, we'll give you just a little bit more of time so we have more participants. But yes, tell us where are you joining us from? Which round you're applying? Did you take the GMAT or the GRE? Let us know. Ah, great, from Brazil. Okay, you're applying in 2026. Great. So I guess we can start now. So hello everyone and welcome to the INSEAD application walkthrough session at the application walkthrough event organized by GMAT Club. My name is Melissa Valdivia and I'll be your host today. It's my pleasure to introduce Emma Bon from Fortuna Admissions. In this session, we'll walk through the MBA application process for INSEAD step by step, offering you practical insights on how to prepare a strong application. There will be time for live Q&A, so please submit all your questions using the chat. So now let's get started. Go ahead, Emma.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks very much for having me here. It's great to be talking about one of the schools that I'm most passionate about. So love the European business schools and really happy this year to see, increasing numbers turning to Europe and having a look what we have to offer here. So hi everybody. Today my goal is to walk you through the sort of application process to INSEAD, which has, in the grand scheme of things, a fairly complicated set of essays. So sometimes it's nice to have a bit of insight into how to approach that and the sort of application form itself. Um, just to kick us off, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what INSEAD is looking for when they are bringing in their cohorts. So they have two intakes a year, one that starts in August and one that starts in January. Different lengths slightly. So one of your first jobs, if you're applying to INSEAD, is to work out which one is better suited for you. So if you sort of have a very clear career path in mind, if you are looking to accelerate, you're probably going to be thinking about the August intake. So it's a very quick 10 months, but it doesn't allow for an internship process. If you are somebody who is perhaps looking to transition your career, and so that internship is going to be really, really valuable for you, you're probably looking at January. So that's 12 months, and that gives you the opportunity to do a 2-month internship during the program. So that's really your first port of call. Are you looking at a 10-month or a 12-month? Do you want the internship or not? In terms of what INSEAD is looking for more generally, in some ways it's not overly different from other MBA programs. So very much a sort of strong academic background. They're looking for people who have leadership potential, who have some demonstrated evidence of leadership. Now that might be managing a team, managing direct reports, but it might also be, if you are sort of slightly earlier in your career, it might be managing projects, it might be demonstrating leadership in your community, but generally giving that sort of that vibe, that potential where the admissions committee can have a look at you and say, I can see this person going forwards as somebody who will be, looking to be a mover and a shaker to go out and create impact in the businesses that they work for and in the community more generally. So definitely leadership is something that you will need to show evidence of in your application. And there are plenty of places where you can do that, luckily, in the INSEAD form. The other thing that is really perhaps slightly different about INSEAD and some of the other European schools is the real focus on a sort of global outlook. So if you've done some due diligence already and you've looked at the class profile for INSEAD, you'll see that it is a very, very international profile. So INSEAD puts a lot of value on the international exposure that you've had. So it might be that you have worked internationally. It might be that you have spent some time studying abroad. You have maybe had a secondment somewhere where you've been overseas. So all of those things count. It doesn't mean that if you are not somebody that has that sort of really evident in your profile that they're going to discount your application. There are other ways to show that, and we'll talk about that a bit sort of further on as we look at the application form. But it's something to bear in mind when you are considering INSEAD, that showing that I guess I would say real interest in multicultural exposure and understanding of how to interact with different cultures, different personalities, nationalities, the real sort of being able to immerse yourself in a particularly diverse environment is something that you really want to make shine in your MBA application. So they have a couple of changes this season. Some were brought in for the January intake that's upcoming. One of those is that they have reduced the language requirement. So for the longest time, INSEAD have actually had a sort of quite a stringent language policy, which is great if you come from somewhere where English is not your native language, because people who are unlike me often have several languages. But if English is your first language, sometimes that's been a bit of a barrier to entry. So INSEAD have removed that currently. And now if English is your first language, you only have to show ability in one other language. So if your native language is Spanish, or if it's Hindi, or if it's Russian, or whatever it might be, as long as you can prove that you have competence to what they call a B1 level, which is a practical knowledge, or sort of working knowledge of the language, then that's all you will need, which is quite different from having a third language, is what you used to have to prove by the time you graduated. The other thing that has changed slightly in the last year is the essay requirements. So I think INSEAD had perhaps the dubious honour of having the most essays or almost the most essays of any school that I work on in my role at Fortuna. Some essays which are still there tend to strike fear slightly into applicants' hearts, but where they had a whole lot of short answer career essays, they've now cut that down to two. They call them job description essays, but they're sort of essays that are focused on your career and your goals. So one that's 500 and then a slightly shorter one. And then they have the kind of what they call the official essays, what we call sort of motivation essays. So essays that ask about you and your strengths, your capacity as a leader, and then your extracurriculars. So the things that you do outside. And that's, again, one of the opportunities to show how you demonstrate leadership in your community and how you sort of interact and are likely to demonstrate your commitment to being part of the INSEAD community, whether you join in Fontainebleau or the Singapore campus. Okay, so hopefully, Melissa, everybody can see my screen. So what I have here is an actual version of the INSEAD application form for the coming season. So hopefully lots of people who are listening and watching today are thinking about applying for the intake probably now would be the next intake in August next year, although interestingly INSEAD have extended the deadlines for the January 26 intake. So if anybody's kind of got a passion for going a bit earlier, they can probably jump in and see whether there are some whether they can get their application together for the deadline, which is the end of August. But most people will be looking at applying, I think, at this point in the year for next August. So the application form for INSEAD is fairly straightforward in terms of what they ask for, but I think it's probably a good idea to have a look through. There's some basic instructions at the beginning, but what I want to do today is walk you through the sort of different parts of the form. So that covers off the recommendations, it covers the essays, and the other kind of information, what we call sort of short answer questions that they ask you to supply. So the first thing you'll have to do is specify which campus you're interested in. It depends. Some people sort of are very traditional and they want the experience in France, the Fontainebleau campus, sort of just south of Paris. Other people are really keen on the Singapore campus because there's a lot of innovation sort of happening in the Asia Pacific area at the moment. And depending perhaps on where you want to sort of base your career afterwards, that can be quite a distinctive choice for you. So you'll need to select your campus preference here. We scroll on down a little bit, there's some personal data that they'll ask for. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over that because this is a little made up candidate that we have here. So personal details, address, phones, etc., etc. Exam results. So hopefully people who are looking at applying in the next wee while have started thinking about whether they want to take the GMAT or the GRE. INSEAD is a school which still requires you to take one of these tests, as do most top business schools. They're a little bit more flexible sometimes on scores than some of the M7 schools in the US. So they also used to stipulate more of a preference for GMAT over GRE, but over the last sort of few years, that's become much less so, and I think they're pretty ambivalent about which test you do. In terms of people who haven't yet decided which test to take, we would normally say that if you are perhaps stronger in the quant, that the GMAT might be better suited for you. If you are stronger in the verbal, then perhaps the GRE might be worth a look. But the best way to really decide is to do a practice test of each one and see sort of how you score. So you'll need to do that and get that sorted before you apply. So on the form here, they'll ask you to submit your results and they'll give you a school code. So you need to submit the official result through to INSEAD. So English test, hopefully again, a lot of you will have already got this under control, but you know, TOEFL, IELTS, etc. Again, if English is not your native language, then usually you will need to do one of these tests. Although if you've been taught exclusively in your undergraduate degree in an English speaking campus or environment, then usually that can give you a waiver. So always worth, if any questions about anything with INSEAD, they're super good at responding. So sometimes it's good just to contact admissions and just ask if it's something very specific to you, because a lot of what you'll find on the website is sort of quite general and sometimes people have specific questions. So your exam results in English, I'm just going to scroll on down till we start to get transcripts, obviously your academic degree. Most people who apply to INSEAD, to the top schools, to London Business School will have an undergraduate degree. They will have completed it. I think I've had a couple of clients over the years who've applied to different schools without that for some reason or other, but usually you will need to indicate that you've, you know, this is our little person here. They've done an undergraduate degree in art history at University of London. So that's all just filled in here. And then any academic distinctions you can put in. So if you are, you know, if you have a percentage sort of win in terms of we've performed, if you're in the top of your class, if you've had scholarships, if you've made the dean's list, all of that kind of thing can go on there. So work experience. INSEAD does have the job description essays, but you will need to detail quite a lot of information here, you know, the sector that you work in, the date that you've been at your role for, the currency that you're reporting your salary in. So if you are kind of in the process of thinking about applying to INSEAD or any other school, it's a really good idea to kind of get ahead of the curve a little bit and just jump in and start thinking about gathering some of the information that you need, because a lot of people spend a lot of time on the essays, and then when they come to filling out the forms, it's a bit sort of irritating if you suddenly don't have that information to hand, but it's all pretty straightforward. They ask you whether you're happy for them to contact your employer. If you're not, you're absolutely okay to say no. And then sponsorship, you know, are you sponsored? Do you intend to apply for scholarships? Again, absolutely fine to say yes. INSEAD are quite generous with scholarships in terms of the number that they make available. So it's just to try and get an idea that people have thought through the costs involved in applying to business school and staying through the program. Professional background. So you'll need to put in your previous backgrounds. Again, this is where INSEAD start to look and see sort of what your international profile is looking like. So they'll ask you, have you worked abroad? You know, where have you worked? Even this sort of down to the cities. And I'm going to whiz through all of this. Okay, so one of the things they will ask you, which is important here, is whether you have any gaps in your employment history. And one of the things that people sort of come to us about, often worried, is saying, you know, oh, I had a few months off, or I went traveling, or I was made redundant, and it took me a few months to get a job. Um, and I guess what I would say is that most schools are very cognizant of the fact that you're a human and these things happen. And also they celebrate the fact that you might have taken some time to go traveling and to sort of get some world experience under your belt. Sometimes people like to do that if they are transitioning from one job to another and they have a bit of space in the middle. But what they ask you to do here, and it is a limited word count, is just to tell them. So they explain gaps. And the idea behind this is that you don't leave the AdCom guessing. So they just want to know, you know, how you've spent that time. And really, if you can say that you've spent the time gainfully. So if you were made redundant, don't stress too much. But if you can say what you did in that period of time before you secured your next role and show that you used it meaningfully, maybe you upskilled, maybe you traveled, whatever it was, just pop it in there so that you explain that for the admissions committee. The idea is not to leave the AdCom guessing at any point in your application. And then internships, which a lot of schools don't ask, INSEAD do. Okay, so these are the first, what I would call essays. INSEAD doesn't really call them essays this year. This is what used to be the sort of split, sort of 3, 4 short answer questions. They've upped this now to a 500-word essay. So 500 is kind of what I would call a standard MBA essay length. So if you read this through, provide a summary of your career since graduating, explaining the rationale behind your decisions and career progression. And then they ask you to include a whole bunch of specifics. So what you've done in your roles, your major responsibilities, do you manage anybody? So employees under your supervision, size of any budget that you might be managing, clients, and any notable results achieved. So it's a really interesting first essay. Half of it is quite pragmatic, so they want to know those details. But actually, the important bit is this bit here. So explaining the rationale behind your decisions and behind your career progression. So one of the things that all business schools are really interested in is not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. So what drove you to take that role in biotech? What drove you to sort of come out of a degree in engineering and perhaps move into consulting? Are you somebody that really loves sort of creative problem solving? What sort of attracted you to that particular role? And in gaining an understanding of the sort of decisions and the choices that you've made up to this point in your career, it helps them get a better understanding for what you want to do when you graduate. I guess my tip for this is explain your why, explain the progression that you've had. If you've been promoted early, tell them things that really stand out. There will be some double up with your CV quite often. And that's something that we often get asked is, I feel like I'm repeating. So it's more about the why. Your CV is, often a list of sort of accomplishments. Anything big you can still include in here, but you want to make sure that you literally make a list for yourself and sort of tick off that you've covered all of these bits that they want to know. Some schools will have these in a drop down sort of text box in an application form, but INSEAD actually asks for it in this now 500-word essay, so it combines previous ones that they've had. The second essay is a 300-word one about your short and long-term career aspirations. So geography, industry, and function. You need to be specific about this, at least in your short-term goals. So I think everybody's probably aware of what the sort of economic situation globally looks like at the moment. It's been tough out there for graduates. Recruiting is tough generally. So when the sort of wider economic environment is like that, it really makes AdComs think about sort of the career path and the career journey that their incoming class have mapped out. And you need to show intention. You need to show that the sort of goals that you have written here are really clear, they're realistic, but they're also ambitious. They show how you plan to put into place or use the transferable skills that you're bringing in from your previous roles, then how you want to map the INSEAD MBA on top of that, and how that then kind of makes sense in terms of a reasonably linear path towards the goal that you want when you graduate. They also ask for long-term career aspirations. So you can afford to be a bit ambitious here. They're not going to necessarily hold you to this. They don't expect everybody to be 100% sure of what they want to do, but they want to see that you have thought sort of meaningfully about what your path looks like with your INSEAD MBA in hand. And this one here, this bit here that I've just highlighted, how will INSEAD help you achieve your goals? So this is a bit of a departure this year. Traditionally, INSEAD over the last few years have not had a sort of why INSEAD question. And this is a little bit of a why INSEAD, but be careful when you're answering this, because that bit about how will the INSEAD program help you achieve the goals you've laid out. Don't just give them a list of what is available to you at INSEAD. They know their curriculum, they know the extracurricular opportunities on campus. The trick to this is saying, you know, these are my goals. INSEAD will help me through this particular elective because it will give me skills in this, or it will enable me to achieve X, or it will sort of build me up to, if you're talking about a negotiations class, it will build me up to pitch and negotiate with investors, or whatever it might be. But don't just give a list of things. Don't do what we call a laundry list. Think about how those opportunities at INSEAD are really relevant to you. So those are the job descriptions. Then there are a bunch of different things. International exposure. So I touched on this a bit, something that's super important at INSEAD, but you have different ways that you can show it. So it might be full-time work. They ask you if, you know, have you been to a business meeting abroad? Full-time work, part-time work, study abroad. So you have lots of different opportunities to showcase things. Might just be personal travel. You might be somebody that's been backpacking. You might like going to sort of different parts of the world to try different cuisines. Whatever it is, you can include it in here. That's quite specific. Try and think about the dates that you've traveled. Sometimes this is hard for my clients. They can't remember what year or what month they were at a business meeting, but just generally sort of keep it there. We've gone a bit broad here just to kind of show a bit of interest, but most people won't have all of these or that kind of thing. But yeah, anything that you can show in terms of international exposure is really important. Rocking on through languages we've talked about. So again, you just include those here. Practical, this is the B1. This is what you need for your second language other than English. So most people will be fine with that if they are non-native English speakers. And a little bit about details there and assessments, activities and interests. So INSEAD has a drop down here, so a list to sort of where you include the activity and you say what kind of level you took it to. So it's fine to include something that's at a very amateur level or a sort of community level, but if you've been a competitive sports person and you've you know, played a sport at high level, or you've been involved in a charity, this one here, this person's a leadership position, do include those, because they are trying to see that you are not just all about work. Business schools really are interested in knowing who you are as a person. So it's not just your professional capabilities, but also sort of who you are, the values that you bring. And in terms of competencies like this, it's similar to what you might get asked in an interview, where what you have done previously is an indicator of how you will perform in the future. So if they see that you are somebody who has been engaged in your community, whether that's at university or at work, maybe DEI initiatives or whatever it might be, or charities or sort of general community work, that gives them an indication that when you're INSEAD and after INSEAD, you're going to be the same kind of person. You're going to really sort of pitch in and become somebody who is involved on campus. Then there is a little 300-word essay here. Describe the activities you've listed above and explain how they've enriched your life. So don't just list again, say how they've been meaningful to you. So 300 words for that. It's a nice little piece in their application. And then any distinctions or honours or awards through your extracurricular activities. And again, not many people are going to have first place award for a horse riding competition, but that's just something we filled in here on the form. But that would show the sort of grit, the resilience, anything like that that you need to sort of achieve sporting, or it might be musical, it might be sort of anything like that at a high level. Supplementary information. Other schools, people often worry about this, but they really are just interested to see where else people are applying. Don't necessarily hold back if they really like your application, but they see you're applying elsewhere. Sometimes that can encourage a school to think about you for scholarships. And then just some information about family members, etc., military service. But the one I want to get to, letters of recommendations. INSEAD need two. So there are lots of sort of webinars and talks out there about who to choose, but INSEAD, like most schools, are interested in people who know you well. So it might be a direct supervisor. Generally not recommended to have somebody who is a family member or somebody that's sort of not going to be objective. Those are a really important part of the application. They can be submitted at any point. Melissa, how are we going for time? Have I got time to just talk about these essays quickly?
Uh, yes,
Couple of minutes?
yeah, a couple of minutes and then
A
we
couple
can
of
start.
minutes. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, then we'll do the Q&As. Perfect. So a candid description of yourself as a person and a leader. This changed slightly. This sort of bit about the leader was popped in. And then really what's important here, how are you working on your development? So be vulnerable here, show who you are. Don't have this essay as all about work. That is not what they're looking for. They can learn all about work in your job descriptions and your CV, but really they want to know, are you somebody who has core values that are important to you? Are you passionate about things? I've got clients who will maybe talk about a bit about how they show their leadership at work, but then a client at the moment who is a really keen trekker. So he's talking about the different kind of treks he's done globally and how that demonstrates his resilience. Weaknesses, don't kind of sort of just blag those. We really encourage people to be honest about your weaknesses and then talk about how that you've identified those and how you might be changing them up. Stressful situation. I would suggest for this that you have a very one concrete example and you use a very sort of structured format so you don't go off piste on this. So STAR format, for example, so situation, task, action, result. What was your situation, the task you were given, the action that you took to sort of overcome the stress, and then the result. And then just this one here, anything else that was not covered in your application that you'd like to share. That's where INSEAD gives you space to talk about gaps. But if there's anything else, if there's a lower GMAT score, if you want to share anything else in your profile that hasn't been covered elsewhere, that's where you can use this section to do that. But I would suggest not reiterating information. Don't make the admissions committee work too hard. Don't make them read things that you can cover elsewhere, because they won't thank you for that when they've got lots and lots of applications coming through. So that's pretty much it. There's a little bit more in terms of just details at the bottom, but yeah, it's a very thorough application. It's a really fun application to work on. It's one of my favorites to do with clients because it does encourage you to think outside your sort of work environment. So Melissa, if I stop sharing and then I guess you can
Yeah, we
open
can.
it up for, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So the first one says, does INSEAD accepts the home-based online version of the year?
The home-based version of the GRE.
Yeah,
Yes, so as long as you have an official GMAT score, it doesn't matter whether you have done the test at home, because those exams are proctored anyway, so they're very strict, or you've done it at a test centre. As long as you have a final test score that you can share directly with INSEAD or other schools that you're applying to, yeah, that's usually fine.
perfect. The next one says, is there a January cohort?
Yes, there is. So I think I mentioned this right at the beginning. So INSEAD has two intakes a year, one in August and one in January. The big difference being the fact that for the January intake, you can do an internship of up to 2 months. So definitely if you are thinking about transitioning career, that might be the better option for you. But really it depends. Some people just come to a sort of natural finishing point with a role or a promotion or something, and January seems a better option for them than August. The bigger intake, I think, still is probably likely to be August, but they do take people across the year, and deadlines for the August intake sort of open with most other schools around September. Excuse me. And then for January, I think the first deadline is likely to open in March next year.
Perfect. Kuhu asked, when is the ideal time to apply for August application and how much time should I allocate for effective profile building beforehand?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. So when I'm working with clients at Fortuna, I will always say that the perfect time to apply is when you are ready. So we would never suggest rushing to meet round one, which is, I think, mid-September for INSEAD, if you're not ready, because you're right, you do need to do profile building. You need to think about those extracurriculars. You need to prepare your recommenders. You need to take time for self-reflection to be able to answer that very personal sort of motivation essay that asks who are you as a person. So it's very hard for most people to sit down and just write that off the cuff without spending some time thinking about it, certainly to do it well. And because it's quite a complex application with quite a few a few essays and a few sort of different aspects to it, we just generally recommend that you take some time. We start working with clients as early as sort of March, April, May. Very busy at the moment because some people are still coming to us, but there are staggered applications during the year. So if you don't think you're going to be ready for August, then you can apply for round two. Depending on your demographic, sometimes earlier is better because the admissions committee are busy sort of trying to make their class as diverse as possible. So if you know you're in an overrepresented pool, then often it's good to get in there early. But early is good, but really what's best is when you are ready and when you've put together a thoughtful application.
Next one says, what is the written proof for English medium of instruction?
So it's hard to, so you can do a test, so you can do TOEFL or you can do IELTS or one of the official tests. Um, if you're talking about your undergraduate degree, then usually if you submit, I'm just trying to think exactly what they say. So obviously you'll have to submit your transcripts, which need to be in English anyway. If they're not, they need to be translated. But on the application form, it asks you for that, and you may need to submit some kind of documentation from your university. If it says on your transcript that, this course was taught in English, which a lot of transcripts do say, that will suffice. Otherwise, I would suggest, you can always drop an extra sort of upload something else to your application or drop an email to the admissions committee and just check with them what they would like you to provide. It's a little bit different for all schools, but yeah, usually on your transcripts, it will say if it was taught in English.
Okay, next one says, is 105 in TOEFL a cut of a score with a 103 could be okay?
Let me see. I think you would need to sort of contact INSEAD directly about that. I mean, I'm not going to say that's a good score or not a good score, because often it depends on the different components, sort of listening, reading, writing. What I would say is you need to be fluent in English across all different parts of English speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So it's very important when you go into an MBA class that you can engage, that you can keep up with what is often a very fast flow of conversation, that you can understand technical concepts. So that's one of the reasons that INSEAD does, need you to be sort of fluent. So I'm not sure what their exact base sort of number is, because it will probably depend on other aspects of your application as well. We used to be, I'm trying to think what we were at LBS. I mean, 100 used to be a very, very base score. So, if you're getting up towards 107, 108, you're probably a little bit more in the clear, but I don't know whether they have a sort of cutoff point specifically.
Perfect. Now, Bara asks, is not having an international experience a big negative? How can one make up for the lack of it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think if you were somebody who has never been outside your home country for any reason, then it's not a negative, but you will have to work harder to prove that you are, the right fit for the culture and the community at INSEAD. But you don't have to have worked internationally necessarily, I sort of showed before in the application form. INSEAD does give you the chance to um, talk about different ways of achieving that international exposure. So it might be through personal travel, it might be through a sort of odd business trip rather than a sort of a long stint abroad. It might be through a study abroad program. You might have gone to school in a different country. If you don't have any international experience, then sometimes you can reference working in cross-regional teams or cross-border teams. So you might be working um, in India, for example, but you might be liaising daily with people in New York if you're working in a big organization, or other areas sort of into Asia Pacific. So as long as you can show that you are cognizant of the fact that INSEAD is a very global school. They are looking for that kind of mindset, that ability to interact, grow, engage with diverse communities, which is what the INSEAD class and cohort is. Then you'll have a chance of sort of presenting yourself in that way instead. But ideally, if you are sort of thinking about INSEAD for next sort of August or the year after, if you've got a little bit of time, then yeah, really try and think about that. I had a client a couple of years ago who managed to get himself a secondment to the US. He had only ever worked at home in Asia, and we talked early on in the process. He had a sort of a long lead time, and yeah, that made a big difference in his application to be able to say that he'd spent, I think it was 2 months working in the New York office of the company that he worked for.
What are the perspective of the outcome on AI writing? How do they tackle this? Because different tools give different results.
Oh my goodness. So this is something we talk about with clients quite regularly. Most schools now they have taken the view that candidates will use AI in some capacity for their application. So it might be to do a bit of research, it might be to perhaps rephrase a particular sentence that you're struggling with. It might be, there are multiple uses for it. So schools understand that, and often in the application form for more and more schools now, they're saying, we recognise that you might use it, but they ask you to actually be clear when in the application you've used it. So you need to disclose that. What I would say is, if you are looking at essays for INSEAD, very difficult to use AI to write those essays. It really, really is, because the job description one, it's asking very specifically about, those different parts of your role, your budget, who's reported to you. It's asking for your highlights. It's asking for your goals. It's asking for your motivations. Why are you doing this? And then the other essays, again, are very personal. They're about your values, you as a person. So whilst you might be able to use it to tweak an essay, I really counsel against using it to write the essay, because when you work in this industry a lot, you get used to seeing an AI essay. And if any of my clients send me a first draft, it's AI, I'll come back to them and go, how much did you use AI in this? Because you can still tell. Maybe in 10 years' time, you won't be able to, but at the moment, they feel very generic, and they won't have the detail that is so important to sort of explain who you are and show who you are to the admissions committee. So they know about it, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend it as a sort of general rule for your applications.
How much more of an advantage is it to apply to round one versus round two, especially in terms of scholarships and acceptance rate?
So this is a good question, because people always worry about scholarships. What I would say is, usually at INSEAD, and particularly, there are scholarships available, certainly for those first two rounds, and often going into round three if you are a strong candidate. So the only real caveat for me is, if you come from, excuse me, a very overrepresented pool or demographic, then applying earlier in the year it can be useful to you, because that sort of profile of the classmate, they can only really, part of INSEAD's selling point is how diverse their class is. So if they have taken in a lot from one professional background or one sort of cultural nationality background in the first round, sometimes it can be slightly more tricky for you to break that through into that part in later rounds. But again, apply when you're ready, apply when you can really put the very best version of yourself forward to the AdCom. And if that means waiting till round 2 or even round 3, then that's probably the wisest choice.
Lika asks, can I submit the GMAT test score after the application deadline? Can I mention the date of my test while submitting the application?
So some schools will accept a test score sort of around about up to a week, 10, sometimes even 14 days after the deadline. I wouldn't recommend that, to be honest, because schools, AdComs do like to see, a completed application. I think for the final answer on this, I would check with INSEAD themselves, just drop them an email or a message and see what they say. Sometimes what schools will let you do is if you submit a score, whatever it might be, as long as it's sort of ballpark around their sort of average, which is usually in old money, was around about 710-ish. I think that's 655 for the GMAT focus. If you are somewhere anywhere near that, even if you're not happy with the score, sometimes it's better to submit that, but say I'm retaking, because then they know that potentially you have the opportunity to increase your score. But yeah, try and get your full application together by the time you submit. And that means, getting on your recommenders as well and making sure that they are ready to submit ahead of the deadline. The other thing to remember about INSEAD, of course, we didn't talk about this, but they have the video interview that you need to complete as part of a part of your submission. So within, I think it's still 48 hours, maybe a bit longer, of submitting your application, INSEAD will send you a link to the Carer platform, and you will need to go in and complete the video interview as part of your actual application as well.
Great. So another question says, should you quit and take a break from work during the application process?
Good question. I don't recommend that to my clients. I think if you have some leave owing, sometimes it can, and if say you have got to take the GMAT and you want to get it knocked out really quickly, then maybe take a leave of absence from work for a few weeks, or if you've got, as I say, accumulated leave that you can use, that can be a good way to do it. But realistically, one of the things you're going to have to do when you're at business school is juggle a lot of things concurrently. So if you take a whole bunch of time off work just sort of because you need to get your application together, you have to think about how you then explain that in terms of the gap that you're going to have on your resume, not just to INSEAD, but also to post MBA employers. So if possible, I think it's better not to, unless it's genuine leave that you've got blocked up that you can take out. And a lot of people do use a bit of time like that especially for test prep, to make sure that's ready. Otherwise, it's normally sort of holiday. But I don't recommend taking 6 months or several months off to do an MBA application, because I don't think the time benefit is worth the explanation that you'll have to do later on to employers.
Okay. One of the last questions. If someone comes
Mm.
from a maritime background, having 11 years of experience across the globe, would the excess of work experience be a disadvantage?
So the average kind of at INSEAD, is less than that for sure. So you're sort of looking at 5, 6, 7, sometimes up to 8 years experience. That's, I would guess, where your perhaps 80% of your class comes in. But there are outliers. And if you have a super strong profile, Merchant Navy is super interesting. Admissions committees are often really interested in military candidates because people like you will bring in new skills. You've got international exposure by the sounds of it, if it's years of experience across the globe. So it certainly wouldn't write you out. My guess is if you have that level of experience, you've probably got some really strong leadership experiences to share. So you might need to explain a bit more carefully sort of why now is the right time for you to do an MBA, why you perhaps didn't do it earlier. But often, any kind of Navy careers, I know there's a sort of promotional track. So it might be that once you've achieved what you wanted to achieve in the Navy, you're looking for an MBA to transition from that into something different. And that's a perfectly legitimate reason for doing an MBA. So it's certainly worth applying and seeing what happens. INSEAD do offer coffee chats and things. So if you submit a CV, they'll often reach out to you and you can have a chat with them. So yeah, so I don't think it disqualifies you at all. And you might very well have a really interesting profile to share, but you will perhaps need to sort of say what you bring to the class. I mean, I have a client actually who is starting in September, who's definitely on the upper end of, not September, starting in January, who's definitely on the upper end of work experience in terms of the sort of scale that INSEAD shares. But yeah, I think go for it. It sounds like you've got some really great experience to share.
And the last quick question, how to connect with outcomes for networking?
Um, so So you have to be really careful with this and be really judicious about how you interact with the schools. Most schools will have representatives at things like the MBA tour. They will run individual networking sessions or information sessions where they'll have students, alum, people from admissions available. But in terms of networking with the AdCom, it's not really that easy to do often. And you must be, as I say, you must be judicious about how you meet with, speak with, connect with AdComs, because if you think about how many applications they have, sometimes that, and schools like INSEAD where you've got applications overlapping each other, when one round is applying, they're still tying up the previous incoming round or class. So take advantage of everything that's available online now. There are webinars, there are coffee chats. That's really the best way to get yourself seen and heard. But remember that any kind of contact you have with a school, treat it as a very thoughtful way of presenting yourself. So think about smart questions that you want to answer, not just stuff that you can easily find on a website or in a brochure. So yeah, I think just be careful not to bug the admissions committee too much. They're busy people. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the INSEAD session at Application Walkthrough. And a big thank you to Emma for the valuable insights and guidance. We hope this session helps you feel more confident as you prepare your application. And best of luck. And we look forward to seeing you out at our future events. Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, everybody.